Welcome to year 2 of A Mick, a Mook, and a Mike. Hosted by 4-time Emmy-nominated producer Frank Bates and retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor.
Today's guests: 5-time Emmy Award-winning actor, Nightcore, Boston Legal, and Tony Award winner, John Larroquette.
My brother Frankie. How are you, pal?
Pal. Good, pal. How
Did you hear that countdown from him? Trying to do an Irish accent? It's
Yeah.
Tragedy.
I think it would be Black Irish.
A tragedy.
Mr. Derek Harris behind the board.
Hello.
Lucky Charms.
Yeah.
Let me hear you go, Billy. Let's hear what you
In the
got.
name of Jesus, but you think I'd be talking like that? It's an awful way of talking.
Yeah, it's an awful way of talking. Well, who we having on today?
Oh, big guest today, man. Big get, Frank. Way to go. John Larroquette. Really excited about this guy. He's, well, Jesus, like you said, you do research.
He won 4 Emmy to Rose.
I felt like I was writing War and Peace. Another note. He did this, he did that.
I will never get to everything he did because he's so magnificent.
Television, film, Broadway, host of Saturday Night Live. He just goes on and on and on.
He does go on and on.
And
And you know what? Instead of just talking about him, why don't you bring him on, Derek?
yeah,
Okay.
good idea.
He cannot hear you.
It's happening. It's connected. Wait, what does it say? What did it say?
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I have no idea how my connection is. I'm out in the boonies, so it's perhaps I may look like a Charlie Chaplin movie, but if I'm here, I'm here. Hello.
Good. Good
Mr.
to see
Smith, how are you?
Good to see you, my friend. That's my co-host, Billy O'Connor.
How are you, John? Pleasure to know you, pal. Pleasure to have
Mr.
you.
O'Connor, a pleasure.
And that's Derek Harris, the third man in the booth.
Hello. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
We're honored to have you. Can I say that?
You may. I don't know how many people will believe you, but you can say that.
Yeah. I want to start off by saying
He loves you.
I love you, of course, but you've made millions of people laugh. Who makes you laugh, and why?
My children, I would say first and foremost, both of my sons and my daughter have my number, and the only time I've ever, and my wife as well. My wife is very dry, very English sense of humor, therefore very sarcastic, which I love. But the only time I've actually lost it is with my sons telling me a joke of some kind or other. But as far as professional people are concerned, being an old man, I grew up glued to the 13-inch Zenith or whatever television my mother could afford, and Jackie Gleason and Art Carney and Red Skelton and all the fellows who sort of migrated from vaudeville to television. Those were my early memories of just going, how did they do that? Why did they make me feel like that? So those guys.
Yeah.
Bob, I think it was Bob Hope who said that when vaudeville died, television was the box they put it in. So much of that.
Well, you mentioned the Honeymooners. You talk about story-driven, character-driven shows. That was a really story and character-driven. You don't have to. It was proof that good writing is good writing, and you don't have to leave a room to be funny.
No, they're exactly right. I think particularly there. I mean, occasionally they would go out to somewhere. When I remember episodes of like Gleason saying he's going to be cool and pick up the check and kept saying, I'll do it, thinking the guy would not let it. Those small outings they had.
Yeah, I remember Gleason saying one time that they had originally written the show. He was supposed to have money, and he said, that's not funny. Poor is funny. Money is not funny.
I guess that is true, yes. Although, then you got to go to Dudley Moore, an author, and he had money and he was still funny. So there are rules to be broken sometimes.
You talked about the British humor, your wife's British humor. I went to see A Good Evening with Dudley Moore and Peter Cook on Broadway years and years ago. And my wife was Italian, and my brother's wife was from Alabama. And they sat there through the whole show and weren't laughing. And me and my brother were absolutely dying because of the dry British humor. It's you got to really appreciate it. Like John Cleese has always been a big hero of mine. Fawlty Towers, funny stuff.
Well, yeah. Yeah, the Good Evening. I've never seen it. I read it a lot and saw bits of theirs that they filmed. Fortunately, we got to see some of it. And Peter Cook was a brilliant brilliant comedian. So is Dudley. So is Dudley. And the Brits, you know, the Brits don't mind making fun of themselves and the rest of the world. So, you know, they take themselves to task as well. And you look at Basil Fawlty being a great example of a very flawed human being, but hilarious. As a matter of fact, I watched an interview yesterday between he and Dick Cavett when the Life of Brian movie was released, and the sort of controversy that stirred, which seemed to me a nothing burger. But Cleese was saying that, you know, what's funny is avarice and greed and stupidity. That it's hard to be rich and wealthy and be funny. You're right. You know, that's what he said. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I tell you, you talked about Broadway. Frank was telling me before you came on that when you did How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, you had never danced before. How do you take a role that requires you to dance when you've never danced before? That's like got to be super intimidating.
I think a good dose of stupidity helps to do something like that. You know, the horrible story of that, for me, horrible, is that when I accepted it, I mean, it certainly was a challenge, and I had been trying to do Broadway. You know, the high class problem of having been on a television series, one or another, for many years. I never had free time enough to try and even do a New York show, because most people don't want you there only for 3 or 4 months, and that's usually the time we have between seasons of a series. So after a series that I was doing with Candice Bergen and James Spader, Boston Legal, I asked if we could go to New York and just meet some people. Anyway, long story short, I was offered the job first off Broadway at the Cherry Lane Theater, and I did that little play, Elizabeth Merriweather's play.
That's a great theater, by the way.
It's a lovely. It was a great introduction to New York for me too, because I never worked in New York. I was never an actor in New York. I say this somewhat euphemistically, but almost true. The very first time I went professionally to New York was to host Saturday Night Live in the mid-'80s. But anyway, so I was offered this play, and I loved Dan Radcliffe, and I loved the director, Rob Ashford, and so I said, okay, sure, it seems okay, I'll do that. And I was out of my depth for quite a while. I kept going back to the apartment that we were renting in New York and telling Elizabeth, don't unpack because they're going to fire my ass and we're going to be heading back home. And the tension that was and the anxiety that was produced in me, you know, I've been married to Elizabeth now for 47 years. And at that point, which was like 13 years ago, I guess, or 12 years ago, I actually forgot her birthday. Walking out of the apartment for rehearsal, she said, did you forget today's my birthday? And so that's how besieged I was with the problems that I had fronting me to try and learn how to dance and sing. I hadn't done neither on stage ever, but I had very good people that were walking me through this every day, 10 hours a day at the New 42 rehearsing, and finally felt at least competent enough to then think about what's funny about this. I told the director, I said, please don't expect any funny coming out of me because I can't until I can get 5, 6, 7, 8 out of my head. There's going to be no time finding the joke. But it turned out well. Dan and I did it and the rest of the cast, obviously, great company. Did it for a year at the Hirschfeld Theater, and pretty much packed every night. I said, you know, the theater held about 1,150, 1,200 people, and I said, you understand that 1,100 of those people are coming to see you, and there's 50 middle-aged housewives from New Jersey who might come and see me. So, but we had a great time doing it every night. And it wasn't tiring. People always ask me about the fatigue of doing 8 shows a week, and it never occurred to me that it was fatiguing. I loved it. I loved it a lot.
Yeah, how do you get up for 8 shows a week?
You know, it just is. You got a different audience every night. You're really a different person every day, aren't you? How you wake up, if the news, if the stock market, or your child calls and says they have a cold or whatever, your emotional landscape is different every day. And when you walk into the theater, it's a whole new experience every night. It was for me. Listen, I'm not a seasoned Broadway actor by any stretch of the imagination. I've
No,
done
but
2 Broadway shows.
yeah, but you won a Tony Award as well. Your Tony
I did
Award.
win the Tony.
You did win a Tony Award, so I think you're being
Yes.
a little modest.
Well, I don't know how much of that was just they were just impressed that I didn't fall down a lot.
When did you get comfortable in that role?
I think by opening night. I think once we moved into the theater, and we spent, I don't know what it is, 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks at the New 42, which is this great building. Someone should do a documentary about this building, where every Broadway show rehearses. There's like 10 floors in the building, and every floor is filled with great Broadway stars, and they tape out the set on the floor, and so you have that area to work with. But every day was going up the elevator and seeing whoever was on Broadway at the time, whoever it was. And by the time we left that building and actually moved onto the stage, which is, we only have about a week or 10 days, I think, of tech rehearsals and stuff, because obviously there was a show in there prior. They had to strike it. They have to build our sets. I felt reasonably comfortable that I wasn't going to make an utter fool of myself. And the role is, it's not the star of the show. He's sort of the secondary star of the show. So he's not on stage the entire time. So I had breathers that I could go back and think about the next thing. And showing up was never a problem. I enjoyed it a lot, going there every day. And 2 on Wednesday, and 2 on Saturday.
And Rudy Vallee originated the role. Is that correct?
He did. Now, did he originate it on the stage? I know I know it was he in the movie.
Yes,
and I know Robert Morris did both the Broadway show and the movie. If Rudy did the stage work, yes,
Rudy did the stage work as well.
I see. And Rudy is a crooner. I mean, he's a real singer. And so, but our musical director, whose name is David Chase, great musical director. I was talking to him one day, because what would happen when you go to rehearsal is you wouldn't just do the play all day, right? So I'd have 2 hours with just the vocal coach in the room with a piano, and just learning the lines, etc. And then 2 hours with Sarah, who was our dance captain, trying to get this 6'4" lummox to almost look graceful. And you do 2 hours of that. But David Chase once told me, he said, "Don't think that it's singing. You're not singing. What you're doing is that you're talking, but on pitch."
Wow.
And I said, "Oh, well, that makes more sense. I mean, look at Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison was a great musical star. We wouldn't say that he had a Pavarotti voice by any stretch of the imagination, but he sold a song. So hopefully I got to the point where I sold the songs."
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, because Rex Harrison and My Fair Lady, I mean, he sold songs. He was great. And nobody ever considered him a singer by any stretch of the imagination, but he was terrific.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So you were a clarinet and a saxophone player in high school, as was I. But
how old were you when you started playing?
Well, my father played in the war. He was in World War II, and he was in a band in World War II. So I had to take piano lessons, and then I had to play clarinet, and he was a clarinet and a saxophone player. I never could pick up sax, even though they're both reed instruments. Some difference in keys between the first and the 2 of them, I could never make that transition. And that's why I ultimately gave up playing the piano, because I couldn't transpose. I couldn't transpose music. I didn't have that capability. But did you have that capability, and did you have fun with it? And then you were in a band, and then you became a DJ? Look at
yes. I started actually playing in the 3rd grade, and the way that occurred was somebody came to the classroom wherever I was, a little Catholic grammar school in New Orleans, and said, "Who wants to join the band?" And I raised my hand for whatever reason. I don't think my family was musical. I think my grandfather may have played mandolin way back in the early 1900s. I don't remember that. I didn't ever see him play. But anyway, I raised my hand, and they asked, "What instrument would you like to play?" And who knows why? I said, maybe because of Lawrence Welk, I said, "The accordion." And he laughed at me and said, "Well, we don't have an accordion in our band." And so I said, "Well, then I don't know." And he gave me a sheet, with the instruments on it that they had in the band, and I literally pointed at one just randomly, and it landed on clarinet. So when I was 8 years old, I started learning to play the clarinet from the first one you get, which is sort of a metal rental kind of horn. And then maybe the next year, the school gave me a wooden clarinet, a Benoit, I think they were called. B-flat clarinet, not E-flat like Woody Allen plays, but a B-flat clarinet. And I was competent. I was a fairly good cold reader, so I could read music fairly easily, and played throughout grammar school, in marching bands, and being, again, New Orleans in parades and stuff, playing when the Saints go marching in, things like that. But then when the 60s came around, clarinet did not seem very cool. And so I picked up a tenor saxophone. And like you said, although the fingering is different, the keying is different, I didn't have much trouble picking it up. And listen, when I say not much trouble, I was never John Coltrane or even Boots Randolph. I mean, I was never that kind of, have that instinct, that light inside of me about music. And around the same time, I got a job at a radio station in New Orleans, being a DJ for a classical radio station at the time, owned by PBS. And started being a DJ as well. And the two sort of overlapped for a while. And then I realized that I could talk better than I could blow, as I euphemistically say. And so I stopped playing and started talking more, and was a DJ throughout the 60s till around 1971. I stopped because I didn't particularly like what was happening to radio at the time. Because when I started in FM radio, there were very few sponsors. We had lots of times to play without commercials. Excuse me. Small station in New Orleans that was called Mother Radio. So, it was the hippie radio of the city. And so we played whatever was available to us. And luckily there were record companies in town, Columbia and Decca, and all the people who had Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel and Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. Nobody was playing that stuff on Top 40 in the mid-60s. So we started playing that, became successful as far as a small New Orleans station is concerned. But by the end of the 60s, I thought, I don't know where this is going to go. And so I stopped that and eventually moved to California and to take another job in the record business, though. But then after a couple of years of that, realized I think I'm supposed to be an actor, and trudged my way up to Los Angeles and tried.
When you first got out here, did you have some doubts about the wisdom of that move?
Only every day. Because I moved to LA literally, and my car blew up in Santa Ana on the 5 coming up from San Diego, which is where I was living with this record company job. And I thought, there you go. So that's a good start. So I didn't have a car. I rented an apartment off Sunset Boulevard. I think it was like $120 a month for this little apartment. And again, using my voice, I got a job. Remember, this is really, we're old people, man. I got a job at an answering service on Sunset Boulevard. The old days when the phone rang, you weren't home, somebody else picked it up and said, Mr. Pace's residence, he's not available right now. Could I take a message for him? So I did that for several months, maybe longer, maybe a year, 73, less than a year. And then started trying out for plays and actually got a part that led to another part that led to an agent in 74. So it was pretty quick. I mean, I didn't starve for a long time. Didn't have to be a waiter. Didn't have to go out and do other jobs. So, and I was living off unemployment from the job at the record company. So I could survive for, I figured, a year. And then I thought, if I can't do it, I'll go home. I can always get a job in radio back in New Orleans, and if I have to live in my mother's basement, I will. Although not a whole lot of basements in New Orleans. But luckily, I was successful enough to continue on.
Would you say what would you say your big break was, or did you have one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first big break was the play Enter Laughing, based on Carl Reiner's autobiography called Enter Laughing. Joe Stein wrote a play about it. Basically, a young man in Brooklyn in the 30s doing a play, trying to find a girlfriend, and a very funny play. There was a movie made of it a few years with Rennie Santoni, and I forget who else was in it. And I got the lead role of David Kolowitz, and got a decent review in Variety. And an agent came to see it. One agent named a fellow named Bernie Cordial, and he signed me and started sending me out. Frank, you know as well as I, in those days, we had a couple of guys who were head of casting at places. Milt Hammerman at Universal, and you would just make the rounds. And I, got day roles on Ellery Queen or Kojak, and just enough just to get some traction, and then got a few guest shots on sitcoms and sort of went from there. But yeah, Enter Laughing would have to be it. And that's also where Elizabeth and I met. She was in the play as well, so we met in '74 while we were doing that play.
Love at first sight?
No, she thought I was a bit of a prick. Funny, but sort of self-centered. But I was certainly attracted to her immediately. So we danced around each other, not for very long, for a couple of months, and wound up together. And she has put up with me for nearly half a century now.
Wow, that's great. That's
An
great.
answering service.
You say Carl Ryder. That goes back to, you were a fan of your show of shows?
Oh, God. Absolutely. And I'm the kind of guy. My youngest son is like this too. He'll talk to his contemporaries, Benjamin Larroquette, who's 35 now. But he'll talk to his contemporaries about actors in movies and go, "Who is that? What are you talking about?" Because Ben sees everything the smallest. And you and I actually, I think, talked about this while we were at work. I mean, of course, Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca, but I would watch Howie Morris and just be completely blown away by his comedic ability. So the show of shows, I would make, obviously, again, being an old man, in those days you had to be home to watch a television show. So no matter what was happening, I'd make sure that on that night, was Saturday night, was show of shows on?
Yeah.
That I would be home, no matter what, to make sure I saw it. And I love those guys.
Well,
Sid Caesar was a remarkable. Just when you think about that those guys would write on a Monday with nothing in their heads, and by Saturday do that, and no cue cards. I mean, they would just know it all. It's amazing, and hilarious.
And they did 39 shows a year.
39. I mean, no wonder Sid. What was the title of Sid's biography? Where have I been all these years?
Yeah, where has he been?
Because it must have been such. And I had the privilege of being directed by Mr. Reiner in a movie in the 80s when Nightcore was on. These little comedies would come along during hiatus, and I did a little movie that he directed with John Candy and Karen Austin and some other people. And I got to talk to him about those days, and it was very revelatory for me to listen to the way that they would sometimes write these, and Sid would come in and throw them out the window and go, "Give me something funny."
Yep. Well, Howie Morris was one of my mentors. I learned a lot from Howie in the early '80s, and I value his friendship to this day. But he told me that, I'll tell you two quick stories. He told me that he and Carl Reiner used to go beneath the floorboards of the stage and throw up before every one of the 39 episodes for every year.
Wow.
And then you happened to work with Selma Diamond, who was one of the writers on Nightcore. But I'll tell you another quick story that I may have told you. Mel Brooks was one of the writers on Nightcore also. And when he showed up, Sid came into the writer's room. Yeah, how he got the job, he got a $5 raise. Somebody, the producer said, do you write? And Howie said, "I can print." He said, "Okay, you're a writer." So Sid came into the writer's room one day, and he said, "We've got a French television producer by the name of Monsieur Brie, and he's going to follow you and see how we write." So for 1 week, Monsieur Brie spoke nothing but French, and Howie would say, "Bonjour, Monsieur Brie," and the guy would say, "Bonjour."
Mel
back.
Brooks.
Yeah. Well, why don't you just
why don't you
just throw the story? Why don't you
When I step on your scrotum,
step on my scrotum. So one day they're in the urinal, and Mel Brooks says, "How you doing, Howie?" And that was the payoff of the joke. Thank you so much, Billy.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on your joke there, pal. I didn't mean nothing by it. I remember.
You guys ought to team up and do a single.
I remember I got a Carl Ryder story. He grew up in the Bronx, Carl Ryder, right? I mean, he lived in the Bronx anyway, at Marshall Parkway. I was 6 years old. I guess so. It's 1954, 55. Your shows, of course, was. But not everybody had a TV, like in my neighborhood in the Bronx. You know, like maybe 1 or 2 people had TVs. So I remember playing, like 6 years old, I'm playing like 2-cent poker or blackjack in the street. And it was a studio by my neighborhood. It was the Edison studio. And they were filming something with Carl Ryder. And he comes out of the studio. And it's like 11 o'clock. And I jump up. I say, wow, that's Carl Ryder. You know, Carl Ryder. And all my friends said, who's Carl Ryder? Because they didn't have TVs. You know, nobody, back in them days, it was a big deal to have a TV. And the only reason we had one, because my old man was a saloon, tenant bar. And the bar owner gave him the TV. Big box, little tube. And Carl Ryder says, hey, this kid knows who I am. Can I get your autograph, Mr. Ryder? He says, this kid knows who I am. He says, get this kid a pen. Get this kid a pen. Give him an autograph. Big cigar. But what a sweetheart of a guy. Just a really, I'll never forget that. I was like 6 years old. It was like a big deal to me, you know. That was a hell of a show that people had on it. Amazing.
John, how many lawyers have you played on television?
Oh, God. I don't know, 20, maybe 15, 20. I mean, it seems like I don't know exactly why, because I'm certainly not a legal mind of any kind. I think one of those things, where you get a role and you play it and somebody sees it, and when he was pretty competent doing that. I remember playing a lawyer on Dallas. Might have been the first lawyer I played. I don't quite remember, but a small, 2-day role or something. And they just sort of kept coming along. And so, and certainly after Night Court, I played serious lawyers, in drama with Boston Legal and other shows. I guess it's just maybe my bearing seems somehow impressive, if that would be a word I would use about myself, which I wouldn't. But I guess that's why.
You played a lawyer, memorably played a lawyer in Night Court. And you're playing a lawyer again in Night Court, the same lawyer 30 years later. But why don't you tell us about the early Night Court? What was that cast like? What were those days like? What do you remember from those days?
Well, let's remember that for all of us, it was it sort of shot us into the stratosphere of career. All of us had worked, Howie certainly had done a lot, and with his character, done Cheers. He had already been on SNL a couple of times, and I had done, the year and a half prior to that, I had done a movie called Stripes, which had some traction and some people had seen. But it was still like, where's the next job? And after Reinhold Wigge wrote that pilot, and I auditioned. Actually, I read first for The Judge, and while this may be apocryphal a tad, but I don't think it's much. But as I was leaving, I was stopped by the casting director and asked if I'd come back and read for a different character, and it turned out to be Fielding, and that happened, and we did the pilot again, not knowing, you just got I got a job. It paid for Christmas, that kind of. That's how you think in those days. Got rent for 5 or 6 months, and then when it was picked up, it was a mid-season replacement. So what we got, I think 13 episodes was the first order. And as the show went on the air, it became clear that it was popular. And so you just get into that groove going, oh my God, and they picked it up for a second season, going, oh, this is a real job. I've got a real job. And that's how I would think about it. That it's the next level of career, that you've got recognition of some kind, you have a steady gig, and every day show up. And I only had one goal, which is still my goal, may have been the goal for most of my life, was try and make people laugh, to feel a little better, to have a little humor in their day. And I still feel that. I still feel that's an important task, and one that I enjoy doing. And it just kept going. I mean, it just kept going, and it got real good. And it became part of that block on Thursday night on NBC with Cheers. We'd come on after Cheers. I think it was 9:30 we were on Thursday nights. and people just kept watching it. And I was fortunate enough to be in that cast till the end of it. It was great.
It was
great.
It was a terrific cast. Harry Anderson.
And it was, it had a semi-stumbly start because Reinhold had always wanted, and again, I don't think this is apocryphal, I think we talked about it a lot. He always wanted Markie Post in the role of the public defender. But when the show went on air, she was obligated to another show. And so that role had to be filled by other people for a bit until the beginning of the second season. I don't remember the exact lineage. You may know it better than I, as to when she came on, because there were several people who were the public defenders before Markie became available, and then the rest is history. And the first season, with Selma dying, unfortunately, Florence Hallop taking her part as the bailiff, and Florence dying, and then luckily we found Marsha Warfield, and she became part of that team and a great addition to it as well. But so by the middle of season 2, it was the cast that we all now see in the reruns forever and ever, and we were close. We were all very close. It was we all had babies because the young actor gets money and family starts again, and so Harry had a baby, Markie had a baby, Elizabeth and I had Benjamin, and so it just it was a remarkable, successful, fulfilling job. There's no question.
It's always interesting to me when I've done a number of pilots, and a number of them have sold. And the first year, everybody shows up in Volkswagens and old beat-up Volvos, and the second year, once it's successful, there is a progression of, Mercedes and Lexus and everything in their parking spots. But
yeah, and I would say that it was a few years before I had a Volkswagen GTI that I had bought with getting a loan from the Screen Actors Guild Credit Union once the pilot was done. And so that's what I drove for several years. And then I said, you know what, I think I'll treat myself and at least a Lincoln or something like that. But we with the boys and our daughter as well, Lisa, we always traveled a lot. So my big purchase was to get a Suburban or a Yukon XL so that we could get the dogs and the kids and go up to Big Sur or something. So although I love cars, I didn't ever own a lot of them, and I've never owned. Some of them I can't fit in, and my wife is very pleased that I'm 6'4" because there's never going to be a Ferrari in the driveway.
And
I just can't get in them.
And then you won the Emmy in 1985, 1986, 1987, 1988, and then you withdrew from competition. What made you withdraw?
I'd like to give some altruistic reasoning, but I just wanted to give somebody else a chance, which is, that sounds so terrible, and it's not true. But I think my thinking was that, because of the and I won't say indelible, but Dan Fielding, the character, made quite an impression on the American public as far as television comedy is concerned. He was very distinct, and his style of comedy was very unique in a way for television in the 80s. Physical comedy and other things about him. His sort of nefarious, libidinous approach to life. And I thought that this show is going to end. It's not going to go on for 20 years. It's not a soap opera. It's going to end. And because of the, winning 4 Emmys in a row, am I branded by that personality? And how long will it be before somebody would offer me a job as a dad in a movie, or just some more, shall I say, normal individual? So I thought it might be time to allow him to continue to work in that series. I had no intention of leaving it, but sort of maybe not have the spotlight on him as much. That's the real reason. I think you know this, but in the 5th year of the show, I was offered a spin-off of Dan Fielding to be in his own series, much like Kelsey got the spin-off of Cheers to do Frasier. And I declined to do that because I really thought that I had reached the end of that character's road, and I wasn't sure what you could do. And he was a supporting character. It would be sort of like, and I don't say that with any false modesty. He was not the star of that show. Harry Anderson was. And I thought it would have been like, if Barney Fife had left Mayberry and had Barney the Sheriff show. It just wouldn't be the same.
Yeah.
It can't be the same. And I didn't think Fielding could carry a show on his own. He would have to change. As when you look at what Kelsey did, that was great maturity of that character when he went to Frasier. And I didn't see that for Fielding. So I thought, I don't want to do this and leave and have one season of that and then just be relegated to the junk pile of shows that didn't go. So I just said, I'll ride this horse till the end. And once Reinhold left, which I think was after year 6, maybe, you probably know that better than I also, Frank. The show changed as it would with new producers. It must, it should. And it just became something different, but we wrote it till the end and did what our 9 seasons, and it was time to go. So, and that worked out perfectly. Much like when Dan and I did How to Succeed in Business after the end of the year, we did a whole year. Dan had to go away because, he's a movie star and had to go do jobs. And I was asked if I would stay on because the show was still doing good business and they wanted to continue it. And I not refused, it's a hard word. I declined that kind invitation because I thought I came with Dan. I don't want to hang around the party too long.
Right.
And so I left with him after the year. It just seems like to know when to go is really important.
And then you did The Best Man on Broadway with James Earl Jones, Candice Bergen, Angela Lansbury. What was that like?
That was an education in acting. When you're on the stage with James Earl Jones and Angela Lansbury, you almost want to remember your lines because I would be so fascinated with their presence and the amount of care they gave to each word. It was remarkable. And Candice and I played husband and wife, which she and I had been together romantically, we might say, in several incarnations, both in Boston Legal and then in her show when they rebooted Murphy Brown. I went and did a guest shot with her, and we did 9 months on Broadway together. It was a great experience. I loved it. It was not a comedy. So to go from this big musical, I only took 2 weeks off, this big musical with a lot of laughs and a big company, and then to this sort of smaller, more dramatic play was a great transition for me, and it was great to do. I loved doing it, and the cast was remarkable. So couldn't ask for more.
So let me back up. You left Nightcore finished, and then you did the John Larroquette show, which was a very underrated show for maybe 2 years or so with Don Rio.
Yeah, we did 3.5 seasons altogether with that show. And I underrated it. There's a lot going on during that time. I wish I'd have been a better producer. I think that my greed bludgeoned my good sense again, thinking that, or not even greed, my hubris, when after the first season, it didn't look so good. They put us on against Roseanne, which I guess one consider a compliment. I don't know. Thinking that we could enter, and at that time, no one could. And I begged them not to name it the John Larroquette Show, but Warren Littlefield and Don Ohlmeyer, I guess, who were in charge at the time, wanted that name recognition. I said, yes, but I'm the one that's going to have to open the newspaper when it fails and see number 86, the John Larroquette Show. And so, yes, Don Rio, I had taken off some time after Nightcore ended, and about a year later started reading scripts that were sitting on my desk, and one of them was this script called Crossroads, Don Rio had written about an alcoholic who we meet when he's like 5 hours sober, very intellectual fellow, well-educated, but the only job he can get is the all-night manager of a bus station in St. Louis. And I like that humor. I like the dark sensibility that Don has. And so we did that. And we did, like I said, almost 100 episodes of it through Whit Thomas and Warner Brothers, I guess. It was still Warner Brothers, I guess, they were with. And it was great. I think the first 12 or 13 episodes of that series are some of the best television written in the sitcom form for a long time. And a great cast with Gigi Rice and Liz Torres and Shy McBride and Groucho Mitchell, Elizabeth Barrage, Lenny Clark, Bill Murray. Great characters, great actors. And we did a good job. It was very good. It just got changed. It got changed because the network was never real happy about the dark humor side of it. So we tried to lighten it up. And I think by doing that, it sort of took a little of the heart out of it. And so it didn't really address the audience as well as I think the first season did.
It maybe compromised your messages.
Yeah, and and again, I think the bottom line is, are you funny? I mean, if you're doing a sitcom and you're worried about the social impact you have, maybe you're shooting a little too high. And I think the style of humor, that dark sort of humor. Matter of fact, it's on my wall somewhere in this office. There was a sign in the character's office that he brings with him. The only thing he brings with him is this sign, and it's written in sort of like carnival script, and it just says, "This is a dark ride." Like as a boy, you would go to the haunted house at the amusement park, and there would be a sign, "This is a dark ride, so if you're scared of the dark, don't come in." And he puts it up on the wall of his office. First episode, and his secretary, played by Liz Torres, Mahalia was her character's name. She said, "What's with the sign?" And my character, John Hemingway, says, "I found it at a carnival, and I think it should be hung at the end of the birth canal." And so that was the first joke that the network went, "Really?" Well, so, I think it was a bit of we had fisticuffs after that for a while, until I decided that, okay, again, when I say my hubris, I think we can make this show funny without all of the alcoholic talk, without all of that, but I was wrong, and so probably should have walked away at the end of the first season, but again, didn't.
Well, that brings me up to a more, I want to say, sobering question, but you and Billy have in common, you're both former alcoholics.
Yes.
And you said you would talk about that. Billy,
I don't know if form is the right word. I think you're always an alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. I don't think that goes away. I fight it all the time. I haven't had a drink in 15, 16 years, and yet I still get uncomfortable when I'm in a movie theater or something and I see people drinking martinis or something. It's odd. I can go into a bar with no problem, but I have some certain times it hits me that I think about it hard. Booze. You mentioned before about New Orleans, and you said, when the answering machine thing. I remember going to New Orleans when I came back from Vietnam to go for 2 weeks. I ended up spending 3 years there. I was tending bar at Pat O'Brien's. Couldn't get out of town. It was like it was the greatest town in the world. You never stop drinking. It's 24 hours. You could drink from bar to bar, go cups. I said, this is the greatest town in the world. But I remember calling my brother when I got to New Orleans, and I got his answering machine, and his answering machine went like this. Mr. O'Connor is not available at the moment. However, he might be reached at the following establishments: Sid's Dream Lounge, the Horseshoe. And so it was just alcohol just runs through New Orleans. So you grew up in the Ninth Ward, I understand. So.
Yes, I grew up in the Ninth Ward. Yes, New Orleans, I once said that New Orleans was the only place in the world where the signs on the bar say happy hour any waking moment. And it was that kind of time. Although I will say that as a teenager, I did not drink a whole lot at home. I didn't drink in New Orleans. I left New Orleans probably pretty much for good by the time I was 20 years old. And when I was 18 or 19, I think we discovered pot, and so that was to me more fun than alcohol. But yeah, I am an alcoholic who just happens not to practice his profession, as it were. And unlike your story, Billy, I must say that when I stopped in 1982, February 6, 1982, I was, I heard a lot about this and I read a lot about this afterwards. I was struck sober. There was something that happened, and it's all personal and very private, but something happened. Carl Jung, who was sort of a step-grandfather to sobriety programs, because he had worked with a group called the Oxford Group, which was very big in England in the 30s, which was a Christian-based organization that was having some success with getting people sober. As a matter of fact, Abby Thatcher, who talked to Bill Wilson, the founder of the most famous Alcoholics Anonymous program. But anyway, Carl Jung said that the people who he had seen who were drug addicts or alcoholics, that they would get sober and have a successful life afterwards were people who had a major shift in their perception of reality. And I didn't know this till years later, but I think that night that I stopped, that's what happened to me. It was sort of like, in the very same instant, not conceiving of living without a drink, not conceiving of living with a drink. And so that night I stopped. I was drinking with a buddy who I drank with for years prior to that. And I just got up from his table and said, "I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be back." I walked out of his house and then made my way home, and that was it. And it's now 40 years going on 41, and just stopped. I had no alcohol. Somehow didn't exist for me. I had it in my house. I bought it for my wife, I describe her as an earthling. She can decide to have a glass of wine or a glass of tea. I can never understand that choice. But it just ended. I didn't have any, and I sort of told myself, I had so much power over me when I was drinking that it's not going to do that if I'm not drinking. So it's never bothered me to be around it at all. I've never been tempted once in 40 years. I say that totally from my heart. Never once did it occur to me, I don't know, maybe today,
That's amazing.
It's been 30 years. Certainly I can have a drink. Why would I want a drink? That's the question that would then come to my mind. Why would you want a drink? So anyway, everybody's story is different. I just happens to be mine.
It's like, let me have a nice Cheerio. Nobody has a Cheerio. They have a bowl of Cheerios. When you're an
Yes,
alcoholic,
right.
you don't look at it like I want to drink. But you had an epiphany, that's terrific.
Well, we talk about luck and how luck, you can make your own luck or you can have luck, but your success was subsequent to 1982. And do you think if you hadn't had that epiphany, you would not have been successful?
I don't think I'd have been alive, so I don't see how I would have been successful. Like I said, I got sober in February '82. I think like 3 or 4 months after that, excuse me, John Belushi died. And I used to say euphemistically to people who were around at the time, I said, if I hadn't stopped, I'd be playing handball with John Belushi right now. Because I would have died. I mean, it would have been accidental. It would have been a car wreck, or it would have been falling down the stairs, or it would have been, oops, the candle caught the pillow on fire. There would have been something, that happened that would have killed me. Just not wanting to die, just wanting to get a little higher, whatever the high was that evening. And so, no, I don't think. I mean, considering the fact that, so February '82, I got sober, and in January '83, we did the pilot for Nightcore. So it wouldn't have happened had I not gotten sober. That's for sure.
I remember being at an AA meeting, and the speaker said, how many people out there have ever been arrested? And about 20 people put up their hand. And I said, now, keep your hand up if you were drunk when it happened. And everybody kept their hand up. I mean, it's inevitable. It's a progressive disease, it does. But one of the things, unintended consequences in my mind of AA is when you're drinking and you're serious about drinking, it's a really time-consuming endeavor. It takes you a long time to get drunk. The hangovers get worse. It takes longer to recover. Then you start getting drunk again. With AA, besides the gift of giving away your sobriety to keep it, it gives you a place to go. If you stop drinking, all of a sudden you're walking around with your hands in your pockets, like what do I usually do? I usually drink it, But AA gives you this camaraderie. It gives you a place to go and tell your stories. I think so. It's a tremendous organization. It's incredible.
Yep, for sure. So, John, let's go back to what you're doing now, which is a revival of Nightcore.
Yes.
What was that like after 30 years? Because I know what it was like when I went back and did Murphy Brown 30 years later. As you said, you were on the show. What was it like for you, and how did you decide to do it? And who's starring in it? And fill us in on all the details.
At some point, it's been a couple of years now, right? I got a call from Melissa Rauch and Dan Rubin, and Melissa has a production deal after Big Bang, and she always loved the show, it seemed like, and wanted to revive it. Her original inclination was not to be in it, not to star in it, but just to produce it. And I was immediately and unequivocally didn't want to have anything to do with it. And for selfish reasons, because I didn't want to be compared to myself 35 years ago. Now, what is it? 30 years ago? 30 years ago, I couldn't, I realized that how the physical comedy that I love doing, I can't really jump over tables like I used to, or fall down and jump right back up, or tie myself in knots as I could have in those days, and loved the physical comedy aspect of it. I thought also whatever his libidinous activities were, I'm not going to do that. I'm 75 years old. Plus the way the culture is today, that's not viable. Nobody wants to see that, first of all. Even if it were, it's like asking a basset hound to pole vault. And so I kept saying no. And then at some point, Melissa called and said, after much consternation and thinking and talking with Winston, her husband and partner in a production company, she decided she was going to play the judge. And so that made it much more difficult for me to say no. That she would play Harry Stone's daughter. The judge will have been, deceased, as unfortunately my friend Harry Anderson is. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, let me see how it might be able to be a character that exists 35 years later. Where is he in his life? Is there a way to still have him be funny, considering he's now 3/4 of a century old? And so I thought on that a lot, talked to Dan Rubin, the executive producer and who wrote the scripts. And I kept talking to him about it. And then I saw a gleam of light that, yes, perhaps we could find a way that he is now alive still living in New York, not a lawyer any longer, a whole different life happened. I mean, 30 years is a long, long time. And so we came up with an idea that seemed to be workable for the short term. My impression was, and my wish was that, Fielding would be in the pilot and then die or something. But obviously nobody wanted to hear about that. And also it was emotional for me because, as we all know now, I mean, during the time that we did it, Charlie Robinson died. I mean, Charlie died while we were doing the pilot. And then a year ago, August, Marky Post died. And I was devastated by all of that. I mean, Harry's a little in the distance. Harry was 2018, so there was time to get used to him not being here, etc. And I actually had emailed Marky a few times during that period, saying, I don't know. And she, always the optimistic, lovely, just heartfelt, compassionate person that she was, would go, no, you got to try. It would be so great to see what happened to him. So, but anyway, and we did it. We did the pilot, and I thought, well, it was fine, and great cast. Melissa's great as the judge. Being on that stage, or at least on that set, and right across the road from the original stage, 10 instead of 9, it was a bit like The Sixth Sense. I mean, I did see dead people, and it was emotional to stand in the courtroom and see where Charlie stood and where Harry sat and where Marky at Marky's table. It was very, and there was no one there to commiserate with that, except luckily you hired Pixie, who was around in the original, and Susie, who was around in the original. So there were at least 2 points of looking at people and having an anchor saying, remember when, because otherwise it's nobody knows, and they shouldn't. It's a different lifetime. Nobody can expect it. It's like, oh, Paul McCartney was in a group before Wings. Nobody cares. And so it was very emotional. But because the scripts were so good, and because the cast was so good, I got into the flow of trying to make people laugh. And so we'll see if we've been successful at that.
Well, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And you'll be pleasantly surprised to see a co-star named Larroquette, who plays a character called Gergs. Why don't you tell us a little about Larroquette?
Larroquette is going to be, I'll speak of myself in the third person for a moment. If Dan Fielding was in any way a breakout character from the original disposition of this television series, Nightcore, I think Larroquette is going to be the new breakout character of this new revitalized Nightcore. She is remarkably funny, sensitive. Her timing is impeccable. Her mind works, and she's just always thinking of funny. She thinks funny. And so I think that Lakrita is going to be, she's going to have to get ready for have some evening gowns ready for certain times of the year. She's very good, and she's a lovely woman as well. And so is Cap, and so is India. They're both very funny. India is great. India is a fan of the show, so it's great. And Melissa is just solid and again, just heartfelt and earnest and funny. It's hard to be all of that, you know, to be truthful and to be open, but also to be funny. And we have that, and we've had great directors, and the scripts have been good, and so we'll see how America feels about it.
Well, we'll find out in January 2023 when Night Court returns.
Wow.
Proof Thomas
And I'm going to enjoy it from memory care, because there's a little senior home close to here that I'll be sitting on the porch.
And you're living in Vancouver, Washington now, right? Or shouldn't I say that?
It's in Southwest Washington, about 30 miles north of Portland, Oregon. Not really a town, not a city. But I was doing a show that filmed out of Portland for 4 seasons, and so every summer, Elizabeth and I would move up to Portland, and I would do this television series. And it gave us a chance to, roam up to the San Juan Islands and to Seattle and places like that, because we always loved the green and the wet. And we found some land and decided it's time to leave LA. We had left LA for a long time before that. We lived in Sun Valley, Idaho for 8 or 10 years.
By the way,
so we like the outdoors.
I also want to mention that the music on the rebooted Night Court is done by Ben Larroquette, your son.
Yes, it is.
He's doing all the play-ons and all the source music, and he's a really talented musician. I'm very pleased that we have him.
I'm glad to hear that. Yes, I think he is. He's a studied musician, unlike his father, who's been graduated from the Berklee School of Music. And he's a remarkable composer. And one day he just sent me, when he knew I was going to do this, he said, "Yeah, we worked." And he had rewritten and re-recorded the theme song in a modern style, and it sounded great. And so I sent it along to Melissa and Dan, and went, "See, Ben's done it." I didn't say, "Hey, Ben should do this." And then I'm sure you got involved, and everybody got involved, and hired him. And I said, I said, all I can do as your father is, there's maybe a door I can open, but you got to stay in the room on your own. And he has.
Yep. Derek, do you have anything?
Yeah, I got a couple questions, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Hello, how are you, John?
Fine. Yes.
Your diction. I'm from Mississippi. My family's from New Orleans. Don't ask me where. I've suppressed it deep in my mind. But your diction, your pronunciation, your accent, you don't have a New Orleans accent. Where did you learn to speak the way that you do, if you did, or was this at birth?
I think that I was early, and I didn't study a lot to lose the accent. I definitely have one. I don't know where it is, but I have a recording I made of myself when I was 9 years old. At the amusement park in New Orleans called Pontchartrain Beach, which was where the roller coaster was, etc. There was a penny arcade, and in those days there was a box, much like a photo booth. When you walk in, you put a quarter in the machine, and you could speak for 30 seconds, and then this little wax record would be shut out of the machine, and we'd have this record. And so I spent a quarter, and I recorded this little ditty about myself being at the beach, and I had a real Yat accent. OIs were R's, you say turlet instead of toilet. Oyster, not oyster. We've got a good friend named Oil, but you put Earl in your car. Don't know why. And that's how I spoke as a child, for sure, and my family as well. But when like I said, I became a DJ when I was, I guess maybe 15. I worked at the station, and as a boy, I loved tape recorders and stuff. And so every night I would record Walter Cronkite's voice and David Brinkley and Chet Huntley's voice, these masterful, very sensorial speech of these newscasters. And I used to imitate them. And I think it sort of just atrophied. I think my Yat accent just sort of atrophied in my teens, and it went away. I didn't really study to do it, but it did. And I think that there are some words that still creep out. Not very much though, because I will say sausage instead of sausage occasionally, and there are some words like that. that will come out, but it's mostly gone. And whenever people try to not know where I'm from and try to think where I'm from or guess where I'm from, it's almost inevitably East Coast, New York, for instance, will come out of there. Nobody ever says, "Oh, you're from New Orleans," right?
My friend Jay Thomas, who we both knew, is from New Orleans, and he always said the New Orleans accent was like a Brooklyn accent.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is true, and I've said it for years and years, but the story that I heard or made up on one drunken night in the 60s, that there was a huge migration or a migration of New Jersey longshoremen to New Orleans in the early 1900s to work on the river. Now, when I was a boy, the Mississippi River was just chock full of boats trying to unload there. My grandfather was a longshoreman most of his adult life until he retired. And he would spend days on the wharfs unloading the ships. And so the rumor is that these guys came to New Orleans, and women as well, husbands and wives and families, and they brought with them Toady Toad and Toad Street, right? They brought that dialect with them from the eastern shores of New Jersey. And that's where the amalgamation of, because New Orleans is not a southern accent at all, certainly. And once Dennis Quaid asked me, he was going to do a movie playing a New Orleans cop. And he asked, how would I learn a New Orleans accent? And like I said, I'm not a linguist. And I said, well, one of the ways you could do it is just practice this sentence. Instead of saying, oysters will spoil if you boil them in oil, keep saying, oysters will spoil if you boil them in oil. And it sort of became, he sort of used that. Shite, I got to go to work. So to answer your question, it just went away. It died a natural death, I think.
Got it. Makes sense. Actually, my dad practiced the listening to newscasters. Funny enough, he did the exact same thing. He has a little bit of a southern accent because he still lives in Mississippi, but definitely not a thick accent for that very same reason. So I find it interesting.
Yes. I mean, Mississippi is definitely southern. The rest of Louisiana is. I've always said New Orleans is sort of in Louisiana geographically, but not much else, not culturally, etc. And there's two parts of Louisiana. There's the French part where my ancestors came to New Orleans in the mid-1700s from France, the Larroquettes. But you get up just about 90 miles north of New Orleans and you reach the English Louisiana. Once you get past Baton Rouge, that the English didn't come down all the way to the south. The French did, coming up from, and also then the Acadians came from Canada and landed in southern Louisiana. So that it became this melting pot of French and the Acadians, and then obviously all the other nationalities that were attracted to New Orleans because of the river, because of being so close to the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. Yes. I have some more questions, but we should.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other question I had. This is an acting question. From your perspective as an actor, actors have a tendency. Well, actors are considered to be good. I'd love to know why you think actors are considered to be good, either by the public or by other actors, and then if there are some nuances that are attached to those reasons of them being good, if that makes any sense.
I think that even regardless of how ridiculous the situation that one is in a scene, whether it be a mass killer, a evil, a funny, sweet, I think that the choices you make as an actor. I used to say this about Jackie Gleason and Art Carney, that if you believe the choices you are making, then the audience will believe them as well. Because I've worked with guys, and mostly guys in comedy, who hit the joke. They know the joke's coming, the punchline's coming, and so they wait for it and they go, boom, here's the funny part. Well, we don't talk like that, just we say the line. And if you believe the line and you believe your choice of how you're reacting to the line, then I think the audience has empathy with that. They recognize a human being in there, and it makes them comfortable watching it, that you're in the moment. And that sounds feedy-weedy perhaps, but that's really what it's about. And you have to be in the moment. And if you're in that moment, regardless of what that moment may be as far as your emotional life is concerned, then I think people will believe it. And listen, I don't say this with any false modesty. I don't consider myself a great actor. I don't know. When I look at great actors, when I look at Daniel Day-Lewis or Anthony Hopkins or Sean Penn or a score of those guys out there, I don't consider myself in that league. I am competent and I am a good comedic actor. I am a good comedic actor. I think I can say that honestly without too much hyperbole. But those guys, you think you're watching someone do something. You're not watching an actor act. You're watching a human behave, and I think that's perhaps where the affection comes from.
Howard Morris, who directed a lot. He was he played Ernest T. Bass and Mayberry, but he directed a lot of movies. And he always said when he was casting, I want to see what you believe in. If you make a choice and you believe in it, there's a better chance than I'll believe in it because you do. If you try to get inside my mind and you try to give me what you think I want, you're not going to get the job.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate.
The greater question for me is not to go too deep into this though, but I acquiring that belief, like going through the process of getting to that belief. Are you creating a scenario? You're probably drawing from previous events, but if you are delivering a line that has no comedic context to something that you've done in your life, how do you get to that point?
I think you have to believe the line. Jason Robards once said, "If it's not on the page, it's not on the stage." So I think that it comes first with the words, and certainly you can build whatever story one needs to in one's mind about how you get to that place. But I just believe the line. If my character's saying it, then I have to entrust myself with him, in essence, just to deliver it as honestly as one can. I don't think about the time my mother left me at the store. Like I said, I'm not that deep, and so I just try and be as honest with the delivery of the line as I can and believe the character, believe it is, I think, the first step. Yeah. There's a great story about that sort of belief system. Uta Hagen, who was a great master of the theater and a great teacher, once was doing a play, and in the scene she had several things that she had to do, several tasks to do, and then leave the scene. And she did them, and like 5 or 6 things, maybe pick up a vase, fill a water glass, pick up a letter, etc. And she did it, and then the director said, "Uta, that was great, but I needed you to do it just a little faster." And so Uta did it a little faster. And afterwards, a young actor who was in the play as well went up to her and asked, "It's very interesting to me that you would take this direction just a little faster. How a great actor like you, how do you justify just a director telling you that do it a little faster, please?" And Uta Hagen said, "Well, it was very simple because I decided that in addition to everything that I had to do on the stage, I also had to catch a train."
Wow.
So she had to get up quickly.
Brilliant.
That's great.
I could consider New Orleans my home away from home. I always try and make a trip there at least once a year. And I don't miss the madness. I don't miss the hangovers. But I do miss the cuisine. I think the way they cook in New Orleans. Do you miss it? The etouffee, the jambalaya?
Yes, I do miss it. And luckily, I'm very fortunate in that my wife is a great cook, and she has adopted some New Orleans. We have the New Orleans cookbook. We've got Paul Prudhomme's cookbook, but she's very good at cooking Creole food. And I'm not horrible. That's a few dishes I can cook, but yes, of course, one misses that a lot. And when I go down there, and I haven't been in a while, I did a movie there. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I'm not sure how long ago. That was the last time I was there. I mean, again, everybody is in the cemetery as far as my family is concerned. So if I go down there, I have to visit graveyards. But it is quite. And there's still, when I think about the food that I would love to have, there are a few restaurants in the city that I definitely gravitate towards as soon as I get there. But now people ask me, hey, where should I eat? Well, I can tell you where I ate, but I'm sure there's scores of new, beautiful, exciting places to eat in New Orleans that I don't even know exist. I go to places that are been there since the 20s and the 30s, Mandina's and Mother's and the Acme Oyster House. And
Quarter to Sisters and Antoine's and the rest of them, all great.
Yep.
Johnny's Pool Boys.
Yeah.
It's a great place to eat. There's no question about it. It's a great place to eat.
Well, John, you've been terrific. Ironically, I'm just watching now the second season of The Good Fight. And I imagine, I hear you're going to show up there with Chris.
I think season 3, I think I show up.
Yeah, so I'm midway through season 2 on The Good Fight. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in The Good Fight as well on what's it, Paramount Plus or something. Paramount Plus, I believe.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
And that was great because I got to work, Christine Baranski and I did a season, 22 episodes of a sitcom together playing husband and wife. That was a lot of fun to do. I looked forward to being on The Good Fight with her. It's great. She's a great, talk about a great actor. She is that. And then that whole cast, because Audrey McDonald, who is this, massive talent, 6 or 7-time Tony winner on Broadway. Just an incredible talent. It was a good show to be on for a while.
Great. Well, John, thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome, Frank. Thank you for asking.
It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to work with you come next season on Nightcore.
Okey-dokey.
Thanks very much.
And good talking with you, Billy. And as we say, keep coming back.
Keep coming back. Thank you, my friend.
As we say. Thank you very much, John.
Be well.
Adios.
Wow.
Terrific guy. Very bright guy. You could just feel it. I like what he said at the end there. As we say, keep coming back. That's the big thing in AA. Keep coming back. Yeah,
keep coming back.
That's one of the slogans. It's funny when he was talking about being a DJ in New Orleans. When I was living with my brother and a DJ in New Orleans, his name was Roy, and the three of us had an apartment in the French Quarter. And Timmy'd say, I wonder if Roy's got any drugs. He'd be driving around. He said, I wonder if Roy's got any drugs. I said, I don't know, maybe. He said, well, put on the radio. Roy's on the radio. He said, put on the radio, and he'd be Roy. Hey, this is Roy. I got the hits. I'm playing all the spin. I'm spinning this. I'm doing this. I'm that. He said, oh, Roy's got speed. And then 2 days later, put on the radio. And, this is Roy. With another 3 hours of uninterrupted music. Oh, Roy's got downs. New Orleans was you had to get out of that town or just kill yourself. It was imagine a town 24/7 alcohol. The bars never closed. You can go anywhere and get a drink at 6 o'clock in the morning, no problem. Hell of a town. No wonder I stayed there 3 years. I went for 2 weeks.
Well, I found it interesting that John said his lucky break in life was getting sober. If not, we would have never heard of John Larroquette.
It's funny. I was going to ask him, and I've often asked myself the same question: what's the thing that I've done in life that I'm proudest of than anything else? And the answer always comes up: sobriety. I wonder if he feels the same way.
I'm sure he does.
Because, like you said, it's no accident the success came after you stopped. Yeah.
Well, good. That's it. Wraps up another show.
Yeah, it did. He was terrific.
Really good episode.
Good get.
Good episode.
Good big get.
And
terrific guy.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Derek Harris, as always, for being at the controls, and Billy stayed in control today. So
The only person in control around here is we know who.
Good night, Derek.
Good night, Frank.
Good night, people. Thank you very much for looking in. Appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. Terrific.
Thank you.
Next week's guest, future Hall of Fame umpire, previews baseball playoffs, Cowboy Joe West.
We'll see you next week.